Welcome to The Rebel Rebel. It's a podcast for creative rebels and entrepreneurs. I'm your host, Michael Dargy. In every episode, we look for truly unique and interesting guests who have said, often literally, F it to the status quo and have just gone on their own way. One thing's for sure is that it's never easy, it's always challenging, and these rebels wouldn't have it any other way. Look for the links to everything we talk about in the show notes on our website at therebelrebelpodcast.com. Welcome to the Rebel Rebel, and I am sitting here at a very safe distance all the way across Canada with my guest, Steve Waxman. Steve, how you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you?
Wicked. Yeah.
Okay. So first I have to make a confession.
Oh, okay.
That I am sitting in my closet. I just want to get it out there that
well, it's your sound booth.
Yes, my sound booth here is actually made up of a couple of drapes that are covering up mine and my wife's clothing. Because this is the only place in the house I can come to where you can't hear the garbage trucks outside. Oh, and God. Hopefully when my dog starts barking downstairs, it's going to sound nothing much more than a yip.
That's amazing. Well, it's acoustic. You've got sound dampening built in.
There is that. Although, hang on a second. We're having fun already.
Yeah.
So although there were a couple of virtual backgrounds that I thought that I would try out to see how they would work. And this is maybe my favorite.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, that's the crowd that always supports me. And then
that translates well.
Right. And then I recall from the time that we talked before, just to set this up, since you were sitting in your backyard, I ended up doing one with my backyard.
Nice.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so Ontario. Oh,
isn't it though?
Anyway. I miss Ontario so bad. Well, Steve, why don't, if you could, let's bring our listeners up to speed and viewers, because we will be releasing this on video as well. Mm-hmm. What are you about? What's your deal? You've got a really cool story, and I can't wait to get into it. So.
Well, thank you for taking the time to ask. I appreciate it. I just love talking about me. I am. I'm going to call it a 40-year music industry veteran.
Yeah.
I've worked in a lot of different and interesting places. I started, so it's not, if you do the math, it's 38 years. And I started in 1982 working for Bill Aucoin, who is the guy that managed Kiss in the 70s.
Oh, damn.
And when I started working with him, he was managing Billy Idol. And when I started working with them, it was right at the time that Billy was coming off of tour and making the Dancing with Myself video. So I got to see a career virtually burst.
Wow. So from William Broad to Billy Idol.
Yeah, I mean, he was already Billy Idol, and frankly, he was Billy Idol to me at that point too, because I was a huge Generation X fan in the late 70s. They, I don't know if I'd call them my band, but they were as close to, I was a bigger fan of the Sex Pistols because that was such an excellent album.
Totally.
But definitely, Generation X was number 2 for me. Yeah. So it was pretty exciting to be able to work with him. Yeah, and I will say at the same time, one of the other artists that Bill managed at the time was John Waite. And I don't know do you remember John Waite, the song Missing You? Yeah. So John, in the late 70s, mid to late 70s and early 80s, was in a glam pop band called The Babies. And I was a huge Babies fan.
Okay. So I've never heard of them.
Yeah. So being, well, I tell you, if you go and you listen to The Babies' greatest hits on the Spotify or Apple Music, whatever, you'll recognize at least 3 or 4 of the songs. Anyway, It was really exciting for me because, being able to work with Billy and John at the beginning of what turned out to be a long career was really exciting because these were 2 guys that, whose music I really, really loved.
Yeah. Amazing.
So I worked for Aucoin for a couple of years. I came back to Canada and ended up working at a small independent label called Ready Records, where my first job doing radio promotion publicity was working with the Spoons on the song, Romantic Traffic.
No way.
That was the very first song I did radio promotion on. Turned out to be a top 10 single. Wow. So that worked out.
Nailed it.
Yeah. Absolutely. Hey, there's nothing to this job. Mike, this is before Mike drop. So Mike drop. After that, I worked at Attic Records, which was Canada's largest independent label, and did Jennifer Warren's famous Blue Raincoat, worked with Haywire, worked with Lee Aaron, had a lot of success. And then towards the end of my time there with Maestro Fresh West, I actually brought Maestro Fresh West in a roundabout way to the label and was there for the first couple of Maestro Fresh West records, which was pretty exciting. And then from there, I went to Warner Music Canada to head up their publicity department, and maybe to the point of the Rebel podcast and what you guys seem to be all about. When I interviewed at Warner, the guy that was the head of the domestic side of the company was interviewing me, and they already knew me pretty well. And they said, Steve, Warner has become a bit of a dinosaur, and the time has come for the dinosaur to have a virus in its belly. And we want you to be the virus. Wow. So I'm like, I'm all in.
Yeah, fun.
And you know what? It was so much fun. I had so much creative leverage. I ended up being at Warner for 27 years.
Yeah, until recently, right?
Until last August. And for 27 years, I had so much creative freedom. Not just as a publicist, I ended up doing radio promotion as well. I also did video promotion. I worked with a lot of really great artists. I was always able to have input in A&R. I was always able to have input in marketing. I was always able to have input in the direction of music videos. So,
wow,
I was never a button-down guy. And I always, maybe because I came from management, and then maybe because from there I went into independent labels, but I always felt like my responsibility was to multitask.
Right.
And to contribute whatever I could. Sometimes it's just an opinion. Sometimes it's, it was, blood and sweat and offensive language, and, to try and get stuff done and to try and get people to hear new, great music if I could.
Yeah. So how challenging was that to get people to hear new and great music? It never felt like a challenge. I mean, it never felt like a difficult challenge. Let me say that, because it was the way I always went about it was every project, regardless of whether or not the artist had a history, I've worked with Blue Rodeo since 1992. They had already had a hit. I mean, my first Blue Rodeo record was Lost Together. So they had already had a history. And they had already had a lot of success. But I still came into every single Blue Rodeo record as, this is the first record from this band called Blue Rodeo. What are we going to do to try and get them recognized? Wow.
And just, and I did that with every single project we worked that was a priority, was I would try to come up with fresh ideas. I would always say to my staff, always come into meetings with ideas unencumbered by the responsibility of having to carry those ideas out.
Oh, brilliant. Yes.
Because you know how it is. It's like, oh, I've got this really great idea, but now I'm starting to think about the logistics, and now it's bogging me down. Yeah. And now I don't even want to present this idea because there's just too much. It's like, no, just say it.
I love that.
And maybe somebody else will figure it out, or maybe you'll figure it out when you say the words out loud to other human beings.
Yeah. Isn't that something? That's brilliant. That's like such sage advice, because far too often, for myself as well, I start getting bogged down in those details. That's awesome.
Well, frankly, I do the same to myself. My wife has to remind me when we go on walks, and she says, "What do you want? What are you doing next?" And I start listing stuff out, and then I'm like, "It's so much." And she said, "Well, why don't you just take it one step at a time?"
Yeah.
Like, what's the worst that's going to happen? It's not nothing.
Right.
But for sure that nothing's going to happen if you do nothing. there was the head of Virgin Records back in the 80s did an ad in the music industry publication at the time called The Record. And it said, a terrible thing happens when you don't promote. Nothing.
Yeah.
So you know what? So to me, and it's always been this way, like every day, every idea, everything is a challenge, but not in a bad way. It's just, how are you going to, people call it, look, it's thinking outside the box. Sure. Whatever you think outside. It's just, just think fresh. Yeah. And, you can take ideas and extrapolate them and turn them into new and fresh ideas. And you can come up with, completely fresh ideas for yourself. I have, over the years, I'm not a voracious reader, but I like reading a lot of different kinds of things, whether they're, marketing books or biographies or whatever. Yeah. I take, and now podcasts to me are, a godsend, because I can listen to all these different kinds of podcasts and people say things that are interesting. Yeah. That maybe somebody else wouldn't be able to think of how what they just heard can apply to, in my case, the music industry. Yeah. But for some reason, I can. I can take something that seems completely obtuse and figure out a way to at least think of an idea of how to make it work within the context of what I do.
Right. Well, and let's talk about that for a second. So you're no longer beholden to a big label. You're doing your own thing now. And, part of the idea about the show is not to, I don't want to plug or shill for other people's businesses. I'm all about the rebel inside and how that came to be. So when you left Warner and you've gone off and done your own thing, you've got a podcast called The Creationists. Yes. Which is an interesting story, I think, in and of itself. And you're not a creationist, but you're a creationists. So right. There's some language around there. But how did you get to what you're doing now? Obviously, you worked with the big companies, but now you're on your own.
Well, when I left Warner, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And I didn't think I wanted to be a publicist anymore. I'd spent a lot of time, chasing down journalists and chasing down artists and trying to connect phone interviews and squiring people around town. Yeah. I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to do this podcast because it had been something that I had wanted to do for 2 years and just didn't have the time to do. And now that I knew that I had the time, I was like, okay, I'm going to do the podcast, but is there anything else I want to do? And my wife, God bless her, said to me, look, if you want to call this retirement, call it retirement. Just don't sit around the house with your finger up your nose. I'm like, okay, we'll see what we can do. Obviously the music industry is fickle, and a lot of people have lost their jobs over the course of the last 20 years or so. Yeah. And the people that are my friends, the advice that I would give them is, why don't you go and meet with people that you work with and just ask them what they think of the job that you've done? Why don't you ask them what they think you're good at? And maybe somebody will say something that will give you an idea. Yeah. So I took my own advice and I started contacting. Obviously I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of people over the years, maybe thousands, who knows? But I contacted about 35, 40 of my closest business associates. And I started setting up meetings and going downtown and meeting with these people and asking them straight up. It's like, what do you think of the job that I've done over the years? What do you think I do good? What do you think I don't do well? I wasn't asking them, do you have a job? I wasn't asking them, what do you think I should do for a living? I was just saying, what do you think? Yeah. Anyway, so I met with this woman named Christina Fernandez, who's an independent publicist out here in Toronto for Alexis on Fire and Dallas Green and A City in Color and stuff like that. Oh, wow. Anyway, we went and we met for coffee in Danish. And she sat down, she goes, Stevie, I know exactly what you should do. I'm like, I'm all ears, give her. Yeah. And she said, I've seen how you speak to artists. And I see, I've heard the kind of advice that you give to people. There is nobody out there with your level of success and your your level of experience that can help artists prepare themselves for the next stage of their careers. How, and, whether it's an artist starting out trying to get noticed, or an artist that's already established trying to find their new way through the world that we're living in right now. And I'm like, really? And she goes, yeah, I mean, there's consultants out there that open doors for people and give people advice and, and tell them, you got to write a grant and you got to do this but nobody is out there with, that talks to people the way you do, to just say, you're ready or you're not ready. And here are the things that you need to do to get ready. And I'm like, okay, well, if that's really the case, I mean, that's part of the passion of what I did at Warner. Was those are the kinds of conversations that I would have with artists as we prepared each project, trying to write a narrative for each project.
Yeah.
So I look at, after I had that conversation, it really resonated with me. So I started talking to more people, some managers and some agents and some producers that I know. And I said, I've had this conversation with Christina. This is what she thinks I should be doing. What do you think? And they were all really enthusiastic about it. I think that there's a quote on my website from Jim Cuddy of Blue Rodeo that sort of talks to, the kind of relationship and the kind of thinking that I do with artists, that I can come up with things that other people don't necessarily think of. Yeah. And I'm like, all right, well, I'll give it a go. And so I started doing what I'm calling, I didn't want to call it consulting because I wanted to separate myself from those kinds of people, right, in a way. And so trying to find a way to define it. And Ralph James, who's an agent here in Toronto at the agency, said to me, what the hell do you call this thing? And I'm like, well, it's entertainment career guidance. And I quickly wrote that down. And on the train back home, I started, I looked at it again and I just started writing like, this is what it is. And, most of the stuff that you see on the website was sort of born out of that ride home. Wow. As I was just typing stuff out, going, okay, this is what it is. This has form.
What's the deal with dig a hole, fill it up?
Oh, so in the early days of the internet, I've always been an early adopter. Not necessarily know how to use things great, but I've always been an early adopter. And when blogs started, I had two blogs going. One was a golf blog. Okay. And the other was I just wanted to write about my life in the music business, like behind my particular life. I wasn't going to give away any secrets. I just wanted people to know the experience that I've had, because I've had some really, really neat experiences. Yeah. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to write a blog. What should I call it? I don't know. I'll call it Dig a Hole and Fill It Up. it's really that. It's like, just dig a hole and let's just put stuff in it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, you're a prolific writer. Like, I really enjoy going through your site and reading.
Oh, thanks, man.
Reading the stuff, and the creationist too, because you do you do show notes. Like, holy moly! Like, that is like actual questions and written out answers. Is that something that you do, or do you hire that out? Like, what does that look like?
I am doing it. Wow. And I'll tell you the thing. At first I was using an AI service. Okay. And I found that it was taking me almost as long to clean that up as it probably would have been doing myself. But then what I found was, if I do the edit, because I do my interviews are 45 minutes to an hour long, right? But I'm posting 30 minutes to 35 minutes, and a few of these are longer. But what I found was, I do the edit that I feel is right, and then I start transcribing it. And when I transcribe it, I'm listening to it slower. I can fine tune the edits. So it takes me, that, because I've got a few things on the go. It takes me about 3 days in total, probably doing 3.5, 4 hours a day. Wow. Of doing transcribing to get it finished. But at that point, to go back and clean up the edit takes, half an hour, 40 minutes.
Yeah. Holy moly.
Yeah.
Dang.
But you know what? It's worthwhile. I feel it's worthwhile, because I think at the end of the day, what I'll end up with is more content.
Oh, yeah.
And so when these seasons go, by, because I'm on my second season now, and I'm recording for my third season. As these seasons go by, eventually what I can start doing is then posting the text as links back to dig a hole, fill it up, and it's just, repurpose the content.
Amazing. What, I'm reluctant to ask you for free advice, but I'm wondering for, just artists starting out, what's what's the biggest bang for the buck that they can do to get themselves noticed? Because, and let me preface this by saying you're doing all this stuff behind the scenes for your own brand. So later on you can have all this evergreen content.
Right. So, okay, the biggest thing, and the thing the thing I talk to artists about at the beginning of, whatever the conversation is, and the conversation usually is a free conversation of advice. Again, it's talking about narrative, knowing who you are as an artist. Again, Bill O'Coin, the first week that I was working in the office there, when he saw that I was into it, that I really dug what, this music business thing was all about. Yeah. He said to me, you need to understand that an artist needs to have a clear vision for who they are. They need to have, which I eventually called a narrative. They need to know who they are as artists, because we don't tell them what to do. We facilitate for the artist. The artist makes choices, and then we go out and we try to make the world as easy as possible for the artist to achieve all the things that they want to achieve. So, watching that with Billy Idol as a case study, I mean, I saw that from the ground up. I saw that, how involved Billy was with, wardrobe choices, how involved he was with production choices, how involved he was with, the set design. I remember when they were going out on the Rebel Yell tour, and they were building a set for the first time. And they would bring these little cardboard set pieces up to the office, and they would sit on the table, and Billy would sit there and he would move pieces around. He would rip pieces up. He'd want them to look a different way. I mean, he wasn't designing. He was just working with the designer, but he was very involved with, I'm going to have to move from here to over here. This thing is going to be in the way. This needs to move here, which means this needs to be here. I want the keyboard player over here. Those kinds of things. And that's sort of been something that's been in my head the entire time in my career. Since then, obviously, I've sat in meetings with young artists where they come in, they might have a really great song, they might even have a sound. Right. But when you try to have a conversation with them, it's like, where do you see your career going? Who do you liken yourself to? What is the story that you're trying to tell with your career? Where is it that you want to be that isn't just, I want to be on stage at Wembley Stadium. It's like, Bill, you can define Billy Idol. You can define Kiss. You can define ZZ Top, the Rolling Stones, the Beatles, Lady Gaga. I'll go, Lizzo, Lenny Kravitz, Prince, Madonna. You can define. That's what I'm talking about. Not, there are a lot of artists who just intrinsically know who they are and present themselves that way. Right. And that's fantastic. But that's probably about 2%, maybe 1%.
Wow.
Others, you got to sit with your friends and your family and your other bandmates and go, who are we? How do we want to be seen? Maybe we can't be that today, but that's where we want to be. So we need to make a plan of how to get there.
So what are you doing for yourself now along the same respect? So, you're good at giving yourself your own advice. Where do you see yourself like as an artist? Because because you are, right? You're helping artists, but you're also,
I understand.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like over the course of the last year, as I've been recording episodes of the podcast, I've been finding my voice. And because at the beginning, I didn't know what my voice was.
Yeah.
Because like a lot of people, when you hear your voice back in a recording, the first thing you do is cringe. I didn't know how to ask questions of people in a natural kind of way initially. And my best friend and the guy that was the best man at my wedding is a hockey author. And I knew that I was going to interview him. I wanted to interview him for the first season of the podcast because I was going to people, obviously for the first season, people for the most part that were easily accessible to me.
Right.
And I did my first interview with him with the understanding that I will get better at this. I'm going to want to come back and redo an interview with you.
Yeah.
Before I post it. And so I think that what's ended up happening is I'm more and more comfortable every time I sit down with somebody to do an interview. It's much more conversational now than it was before.
Yeah.
The creationist is born out of a curiosity about creativity. And really for me, that it was keeping in mind, trying to get out of my head what I hear other people doing and just living inside of my own personal curiosity when I'm asking people questions.
Right.
And I think what's happened over the course of the 14 episodes that I've done so far is I've come to a point where I'm not afraid to ask stupid questions. I'm not afraid to ask questions that have been asked before. Right. I'm just asking questions that feed my own personal curiosity.
Yeah.
And I think, as I said, I'm working on the episodes for season 3, which will all be music related. And I don't think at the beginning I thought that I would do that. I thought at the beginning it's like, oh, I don't need to do music stuff. I want to get away from the music stuff. Right. But I was inspired by a conversation with a guy that had written a music book. And I'm like, I could do this. I'm going to reach out to some key people and see if I can lock in some really great interviews. And if I can do that, then I'm really going to make a go of this.
Awesome.
Yeah. So that's kind of, I've already started thinking about, will season 4 be about TV? Will season 4 be about filmmaking? Will season 4 be about, medicine? I don't know. But it's like the idea of, growing this thing to like, okay, it can be about themes.
Right. Yeah.
Maybe, and again, it's like, I always wanted to talk about people that create, but then I realized, maybe I can find a psychologist that can talk about the creative process and how that, how that fires in a person's mind and ask them about that kind of stuff. So.
Oh, that's fantastic. How interesting is that you can just follow your own muse and your own desire, right? To ask those questions.
I look at it, people don't talk enough. And sometimes I say my sister is really great at asking people questions, but it makes me uncomfortable because she asks so many questions. But I could see that, she asks people questions because she wants to know. She's really curious. There's, it's funny. One of the interviews that I'm about to do for season 3 is with a producer.
Okay.
And when I reached out to this producer, my sister said, did you tell them that you used to work for some of the artists that they worked with? And I went, no. She goes, well, why not? I'm like, well, because I know how to pitch, and I pitched them the podcast. And I think that I've had enough people on the podcast. And I think that the thing that people are, the people are enjoying about the podcast is how diverse everything is with regards to creativity.
Right. Yeah.
And, even the music themed season that'll happen later this year, each of the guests are very, very different from one another, but they're all music related. Man.
Okay. So I want to ask all the interviews that you have done. I don't want to ask for a favorite, but what do you, what's kind of like your favorite moments that happen when you're interviewing a guest or when you're even talking with an artist and helping them out? Like, do you have something that you're always sort of looking for?
No. I mean, the one question that I always ask, because it's the thing that I'm really curious about, is the spark of inspiration. How, where did a song start from? Where did a painting start from? Where did a golf course design start? I mean, that to me is the most interesting thing. Once I got interested in art as a kid, I would go to art galleries and I would stare at paintings and like, what was the first brush stroke? Like, it's like, I have no idea. And, did they really, were they standing in front of a field with a plow, or did that come out of their head? Or were they trying to do something else? And was that plow supposed to be a dog or a cow? I don't know. That kind of stuff. I find that kind of stuff fascinating. And when I interviewed Jim Cuddy on the first episode, talking about songwriting, and I asked him that question, I knew, because I've known Jim obviously for a long time working with Blue Rodeo, and I knew that when it was time to write songs, he wrote songs like it was a job. Right. He would come to work. In that case, he would come into the studio. He would sit in this, they have their own studio. He would come in there and he had all these instruments around him, and then he would try and create a song. And when I asked him that question about inspiration, he said to me, I work towards inspiration. I'll move from one instrument to another. If something's not working on a guitar, I'll go to a piano, or I'll go to a mandolin, or, I'll just keep working at it until that moment of inspiration hits me. And I found that really, really fascinating. And then realized that, creativity as a spark is great for all of us. Right. Creativity as a job is work.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And, even the episode about designing a golf course, and how, what the golf architect will do is look at a piece of land, and there's not 18 holes on that piece of land. There's 37 holes on that land. And he's got to find the right routing to get the best 18 holes to work a particular way with a set of problems. And, that kind of stuff is really fascinating to me.
No kidding. If you had 5 things that people needed to know, what would they be? And this can be creativity inspired, or it could just be stuff that you've picked up along the way.
Well, I'll start with, never edit yourself.
Oh, that's hard.
Yeah, it is. It's really hard. Never edit yourself. Never be afraid to be bold.
Yeah.
Well, I guess because they're all sort of the same. It's like, it's all sort of born out of those two things, really. Never edit yourself and always be bold. Because I think that, unless you have a fear of dying, you should try everything. And okay, you're not going to, I think a lot of people don't do things. Maybe this is all encompassing here. People don't do things because they are afraid that they won't be able to do them. It's not so much that they're afraid of failure. They're just afraid that they won't be able to do it as well as somebody else. They're not going to be able to do it as well as they want to do it.
Sure.
I had a conversation 6 years ago now with Tom Petty. I had an opportunity to work with Tom. I'm calling him Tom. It's Tom Petty. I have to say the whole thing because it sounds too familiar to call him Tom.
Yeah.
I had a conversation with Tom Petty about 6 years ago as we sat and waited for an interview to start. And I told him that I was a huge fan, because I am a huge fan. And I told him the story of how I first heard his music, because I was one of those kids that would go to record stores every Saturday to see the new releases. And there was Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers' first album, and it looked really, really cool. Yeah. And they had the leather jackets, and I took it home, and it was like, I'm a Tom Petty fan.
Right.
That's the beginning and end of that. But I said to him, it's what's amazing to me is you guys have released so many records, And you don't have one shitty song on any of those records. And he looked at me and he went, well, we just don't let anybody hear the shitty songs. and I mean, to me, that speaks volumes, because I think that that's the thing that people don't realize, is that not everything is fully, like the stuff that you see, that's not one try and it's done.
Oh, yeah.
You know, whether it's songwriting or painting or architecture or car design or a golf course or coming up with a new medicine or a medical implant, like it's done.
Yeah.
It's, you know, people go and it's like, okay, I like this and I don't like that. And I got to fix this and I got to work on that. And it's, you know, my sister wrote a book called Grading the Teacher. And it took her forever to write. Or it was taking her forever to write. And I said, why is this taking you so long? And she goes, well, I write a paragraph, I go back and I edit it. And I'm like, no, you got to vomit out all of the words.
Yeah.
Get them all out, then go back and then edit it later. And it might completely change, but you at least got to get it all out on the page, because if you do it this way, it's never going to get done.
Oh, for sure.
And you're never going to be happy with it.
Yeah. So she got it done?
Yeah, and I think it was a bestseller for a while. This was ages ago, back in the mid '80s.
Good for
but
her.
No, it was a really great book, because what was happening was, there were a lot of students out there that were getting shitty grades, not because they were bad students, but because their relationship with the teachers weren't working.
Oh, wow.
And this was a book to help parents grade the teachers. This was a book that gave parents, because my sister was a teacher.
Yeah.
Not at the time, but she had been a teacher. And so this was kind of a guide of, these are the kinds of questions you should be asking your kid's teacher to make sure that they're getting taught properly.
Wow.
Yeah.
Smart.
My sister's pretty smart and creative too.
Creative. I'm obviously just loving, I can't wait for season 3 of The Creationists to show up. I can't wait for season 4 and season 5 to see what else you do with it. I think it's such a great idea to continue to delve and, mine, creativity and figure that out. It's such a worthwhile pursuit. I'm really excited by it.
Thank you for saying that. Appreciate it.
I'm really excited for artists that you help develop, because I think that there's so much out there. And today, I guess, is way different than it was in the 80s, I'm guessing.
In a really good way. I mean, when the whole COVID thing started, I had a couple of clients for my entertainment career guidance that were not pumping right in your face over. I had a couple of clients and I said to them, don't think of this as a totally bad thing in terms of your career. Think of this as, there are artists that have been touring that can't tour. You're not touring. And so I think that, the playing field is pretty level for everybody right now, because nobody's touring, which means that everybody can come up with interesting and creative ideas on, well, one, everybody should be writing songs. And two, it's like, whether you're doing performances online or not, this is a good a time as any to work on what your live presentation is going to be. You are going to come back at some point.
Right.
You are going to be able to be out there. So why not have people be blown away by your development as an artist?
That's great advice. One of my favorite parts of the show is asking people like yourself. I call them rebels in waiting. These are the people that are, either like you, about to take, a leap into a brand new experience. They leave a big company and going to start their own thing, or maybe it's an artist. What advice would you give those rebels in waiting for, how to get there?
If you try to condense your idea into one sentence. And if it's not one sentence, no more than 2 sentences. That's the first thing that you should do, because that at least will give you really, really solid focus on what it is that you want to accomplish.
Yeah.
And then everything that this is pretty much, this is finding the narrative, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because then after that, everything just feeds into that that motif.
Right.
And so it makes decisions that you make easier, because it's like, does that decision feed into this narrative?
Right.
And you'll hear you'll hear things, you'll read things, you'll see things, and you go, that fits, and you start putting everything in this bucket. Once you feel confident about what that one sentence is or what those two sentences are, then start doing it.
Yeah.
Because you right there, that's your foundation. All you need is a foundation. You will make mistakes, things won't work, but as long as you have a foundation to work with, you can give yourself a chance to grow.
Yeah. You can always go back to that, sort of check in with that foundation.
Well, that's the thing. That's like, that keeps you grounded.
Yeah. That truth.
It's like, are you moving too far away from what the initial idea was?
Yeah.
And if you are, that's fine too, because if you come up with a new definition, then that wasn't the idea. This might be the idea.
Oh, right. Because then you can at least test against it, right?
Yeah. I mean, look at entertainment career guidance was the third thing. It started, the first thing was, if you go on my website, there's a thing that says, define your narrative, create your content, share your story.
Yeah.
That's how entertainment career guidance started. That
Right.
was the very first thing that I put at the top. That was kind of that's how I started building the thing.
Gotcha.
And, and like I said, that conversation that I had with Ralph James, when he said, well, what the hell is this? Because I realized, well, he doesn't know what this means.
Yeah.
It's like, you're right. I need to come up with a better way of saying the same thing. What is it exactly that I shouldn't tell people what they should do. I should tell people what I am here for.
Yeah.
And the reason I am here is to give you entertainment career guidance. And then if you scroll down, you'll see that I've worked with a bunch of people.
Yeah.
You see that I have a history, and you'll get a sense that, part of my philosophy is define your narrative, create your content, share your story.
It's amazing. The alignment with what I do creatively is incredible. Like, because isn't that something? I love it. Yeah. So I'm going to have all these links and notes and stuff like that, in the show notes. So I am stevewaxman.com is the website.
Yeah.
And do you actually have three first names?
Yes.
Oh, really?
Yes, I do. So here's the, I thought
we were just being clever.
Well, yes. Okay. So I have three first names.
Okay.
I go by Steve.
Yeah.
And when I was in university, I was studying screenwriting, and I thought to myself, if I ever write a book, I think as an author, it would be really high class to be I am Steve Waxman. So I think that's what I'll do. I'll be, when I write a book, I'll be I am Steve Waxman. So last year when I was putting all this stuff together, and my mother-in-law said to me, so what are you calling it? I'm like, oh, it's just my name. It's Steve Waxman, And it's like, I'm not going to, I had some names I was considering, like 225, what was it? 225 Enterprises or something like that. And that's just, it's my birth date. And and somebody said, well, what's that going to mean to anybody? I'm like, yeah, I suppose you're right. Yeah. So I said, I'm just going to call it Steve Waxman. And my mother-in-law, who knew about this I am Steve Waxman idea, said, well, why don't you call it I am Steve Waxman? I'm like, no, that's too silly. And then she left, and I'm like, no, that's not silly at all. That's actually really good. That's what I should do.
That's awesome. Oh, it's so good. I'm going to be bold. What's your favorite book ever?
Oh, I have two.
Okay.
Because they really are two favorite books, because I've reread both of them several times.
Okay.
One you'll know for certain. It's A Prayer for Owen Meany.
I don't know that one.
You don't know A Prayer for Owen Meany?
No.
Oh
my gosh.
John Irving.
Oh, great. Okay. I will add that to my list.
geez, I can't believe that you don't know that book. Sorry. No, that's not necessarily a reflection on you. It's just one of those books that I every time I say that, everybody goes, "Oh, I love that book." Yeah. So this is the first time somebody has said, "I don't know that book."
I am a rebel after all.
After all, the other book, you won't know the author and you won't know the book. I feel as though I am the only person in the world that has read this book, but it's impossible because they made it a hardcover book. It's called There Should Have Been Castles, and it's by an author named Herman Raucher, who's the guy that wrote Summer of 42.
Wow.
And they're both fiction, and they're both incredibly entertaining. I'm trying to think of a television. There was a movie a few years ago with regards to There Should Have Been Castles. There was a movie a few years ago that I don't recall the name of right now, where it was about Sid Caesar's Show of Shows. It was a romantic comedy that took place behind the scenes of 1950s variety shows.
Oh, okay.
And this book is the same thing. It's a romantic comedy about a television writer and a dancer who meet in New York and their relationship over the years. And it's just so well written. It's like watching just a really great rom-com.
Oh, that's great. Okay.
Nothing insightful with regards to, the business book you must read.
Oh, no, I don't care about any of that stuff. I'm curious about what sort of, the fabric of a person, right? Like, and that's why I ask these questions is, I want it to be like a weird book or some sort of strange song that you fell in love with when you were a kid. Speaking of which, do you have a favorite band? Is that too crazy a question to ask?
It's not a crazy question to ask. So the first band that I loved was Kiss.
Okay.
So working for Bill O'Coin was a treat.
No kidding.
The first band that I wrapped my arms around with and held on tight was Aerosmith.
Really?
The first band that I called my own was Stars. The first band that I felt like I would have loved to have been in that band was Cheap Trick. And the first band that I fell in love with that was hard rock and heavy metal was Judas Priest. So that's the 70s.
Yeah. In
the 80s, around 81, I heard Prince for the first time. And in a friend's dorm room, and from 82 to 89 or 90, I listened to a Prince record every single day.
Wow.
Whatever, not necessarily one particular record, but I listened to Prince every single day for those 7.5 years.
Holy moly.
And I consider, since maybe we'll get to this, I consider Prince's Sign of the Times to be the greatest album ever recorded.
Yeah.
And I think that 1999 is the greatest pop song ever recorded.
Well, you're reading ahead in the interview.
Sorry. If you want to get to those questions.
Well, I'll ask you again. Yeah. Isn't that something? Well, I always thought that he was such a brilliant musician and showman.
Oh yeah. Please, if anybody hasn't had a chance to be there in person, I'm sorry, and you'll never see it. But there's so many great performances that are online that you can watch now.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you, as many. How many times I saw him 3-4 times. So not as much as I would have liked to.
Oh, I never saw him once.
I saw Aerosmith 20 times, for goodness sake. But when I saw one show that he played in Toronto, I'm pretty sure the show was in Toronto, and the stage was in the center of Maple Leaf Gardens, and there was a stage, a ramp that went off either side of the stage. So it was kind of like this long stick with a ball in the middle where the band was playing. And at one point, I don't remember what song it was, but he started running down this ramp, and then he just landed on his heels and slid, playing a guitar solo on his heels. It was probably 5 feet, but it certainly looked like 15 or 20 feet. He slid, and then he landed right when the high note hit. And it was just, it was mind blowing.
Wow.
But I will say, but you know what? It's funny. It's like, I've been really, really lucky over the years. I've seen a lot of bands.
Yeah.
I saw Queen a couple of times.
Wow.
You know, I've seen Thin Lizzy. I've seen a lot of amazing bands. And still, one of the most dramatic things I ever saw was I saw Bowie on the Heroes tour. And the way the show started, I don't remember who the opening band was, but all the lights were up and people were out getting hot dogs and, you know, and pop and whatever.
Yeah.
And then Bowie and the band walk out on stage. The lights are still up, and they go into Heroes, and they play Heroes with all the lights up.
Wow.
And then you see people running in from all areas, right? Going. So they're playing Heroes, which is that song is just so amazing. And then as soon as the song was done, all the lights went out, and it was even more dramatic than if it was the other way around and all the lights suddenly had come up, because you expect that.
Yeah. Oh my God. Hilarious. Yeah. What a great, I got chills. Look at that. Chills.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Oh, that's amazing. I love that stuff. Ooh. Well, we already know what your favorite song is.
Yeah.
What's your favorite television show?
I don't want to come up with something terribly obvious. God, it's much like the same way. When I was a kid, it was the Wild Wild West, and the Monkees.
Right on.
When I was older, God, I did like the Partridge Family quite a bit. When I was, and Mary Tyler Moore.
Yeah.
When it got into, I don't know that I watched much TV in the 80s, but I mean, obviously, my wife and I were late to Breaking Bad.
Oh yeah. Great.
But
show.
when we got to it, it was ridiculous. We would watch 4 to 5. We literally, because we got to it at the end.
Oh, sure. So you could just go.
So we went to the very beginning, and we would watch 4 or 5 episodes at a time, and it'd be 2:00 in the morning. We're like, we got to go to bed now. It's hard to pick one, because again, it's like different eras.
I get it.
Yeah.
Let's end it on this. What is the one thing that you haven't done yet that you need to do?
Ooh, that's a huge question.
Oh yeah, I drop bombs.
Nothing. I don't need to do anything, but I play guitar.
Yeah.
I want to be able to record some songs and have them be fully realized. I want to collaborate with people. My wife and I have this conversation all the time, because I always bring it up. It's like, I never feel like I'm in a situation to collaborate. I feel like I'm in a situation to collaborate, but I always feel like I'm in a situation to collaborate with people that aren't collaborating.
Right.
And it's so frustrating. I want to collaborate with people. I have a friend who is a guitar player and is actually the guy that masters my episodes of the podcast.
Oh, right on.
And he and I have started collaborating, and it's really a lot of fun, because we're passing music back and forth to each other, and
right.
I really enjoy making music and writing music, but I can't write lyrics for the life of me, which is so bizarre, because I write so much,
right?
And yet I can't write lyrics.
Different muscle.
But I just thought of something. You said, let's end it here, but I can't, because I want to share a story with you.
Yay!
I want to share the story that I wanted you to ask me that you didn't ask. I want to share the Kiss story with you.
All right, do it.
So when I was working for O'Coin, I would run across town to deliver packages to people and whatnot.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I would have to do is I would have to take files from the office and take them over to the warehouse that they keep all of the old files. And I would go over to this warehouse. It's over by the Hudson River.
Yeah.
And I would go into the warehouse and they would give me a box of keys. And in that box were keys they had 3 or 4 different rooms that you could go into. And some of the rooms had band gear. Well, one of the rooms had all the old KISS gear. And O'Coin wasn't managing KISS anymore, but they were storing their stuff in the same place. And the KISS key was in the same box. So for months and months and months, I wouldn't go in. And one day, I knowing that no one was going to look and no one was going to see, I went into the KISS room.
Oh my God!
And they had everything. So I closed the door behind me. I put on Jean's demon boots. I pulled on Paul's feathered armbands. I put on Ace's cape from the Dynasty tour. I opened up a guitar case that had a smashed mirrored guitar on it.
Oh my God.
It had a strap. I put the guitar on and I stood in front of a mirror and I played rock and roll all night.
Yeah, you did.
And so what's
so good.
Yeah. So there's no security cameras. There were no selfies at the time. And for years I've been telling people this story, and I know that it's true.
Yeah.
But it's one of those stories that I feel like people probably don't believe me.
Yeah.
Because why would they believe me? This is not, this is an incredible story.
Yeah.
But however many years ago, 3-4 years ago, I went to New York City for a reunion of O'Coin employees from over all the years.
Oh, nice.
And I shared this story with them, and they all believed me because they knew exactly what I was talking about. And that was like, oh, thank God.
Did anybody else fess up that they went in and did stuff too?
No, and nobody would have. I mean, these were, everybody else that worked there were adults.
Wow.
I was the only one that was bonehead enough to go and do something like that.
Oh my God. One thing I didn't ask you about was Picasso. And, and maybe this is a great place to end it off, is the beginning of it all, right? Because talk to me.
That was, I mean, that's frankly, so this story about Picasso is pretty much the beginning of everything for me.
Yeah.
It wasn't just, creativity, creating things has been really important to me my entire life. Whether I picked up instruments to play, I tried to be an artist. I've tried all these things. When I was a kid, there's a channel out here in Toronto called TV Ontario, and it's an educational channel. Yeah. And one day I had turned it on, and there was a Picasso documentary, and the documentary it was a French documentary with English subtitles, and at one point they had a camera set up behind a piece of glass that in essence was the easel for Picasso, and you watched him create a piece of art from the easel's point of view.
Oh my God.
And you watched how this piece of art changed as he, either added ideas or took away ideas. And it really blew my mind that that's the way people create, that they come to it maybe with a thought, maybe with an idea, maybe they just, if you go and you want to write something and you just you're looking at a blank page, it's like, well, just put the first word in, put the, and see what happens after that. Yeah. But it was the same thing. Just put a line down, and what comes from the line? Because you can see something from that line. I mean, maybe it's a snake, maybe it's a tree, maybe it's the side of a car. But you can, and I watched that, and as a young kid, I became mesmerized by that whole process. And that made me feel like if I picked up a guitar, I could figure out how to play it. If I sat down at the piano, I could figure out how to play it. If I sat in front of a blank piece of paper with some crayons, I could figure out how to draw on it, because you can do anything. And again, going back, it may not be great to somebody else.
Yeah.
But if it's something that satisfies your soul, that's all that's really important.
Damn. Steve, this has been an absolute pleasure. And I'm going to hang on and listen to this episode over and over and over again. Thank you so much. You can find out more about every one of our guests in the show notes at therebelrebelpodcast.com. And don't forget to subscribe to The Rebel Rebel wherever you get your favorite podcasts. I'm your host, Michael Dargy. Thank you so much for listening.